Artificial intelligence promises to revolutionize clinical trials and reshape regulatory oversight. But is the pharma industry ready? And can FDA keep pace with the technology? Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz Podcast, where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Tom Doyle. He's Chief Technology Officer at Medidata, a leader in digital transformation for clinical research. We're going to discuss Clinical Trials Day, the evolving landscape of clinical trials, and the groundbreaking role of AI. Do you like this show? I hope so, and I hope you'll subscribe and leave a review. Tom, welcome to the HealthBiz Podcast.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Hey, I've heard of a lot of different days. I've never heard of Clinical Trials Day. What is that, and why is it significant?
Clinical Trials Day is an opportunity for us to reflect on the history of clinical research. We remember back to the very first sort of gold standard clinical trial where we demonstrated, or where it was demonstrated, that you could have a positive effect on scurvy. It was a very simple design trial, but nevertheless, it sparked an entire multi-decade, really multi-century approach in research that has yielded some of the most important medicines that people take today. It's a chance for us to think about how we continue to evolve and challenge ourselves in this very fast-paced and innovative and demanding environment, but also how we remember all the people who participate in clinical trials, all of the study teams that work so hard to ensure the safety of patients while accelerating new novel treatments for patients, and also the patients themselves who give a lot to be a part of clinical trials, not only for the hope that it might bring them in their care journey that they're currently on, but the hope for many others who are suffering from similar ailments.
Now, as I recall, I think the insight about what you could do to stop scurvy was a strategic advantage for the British Navy. Is that right?
It was. It was the impact that citrus fruit actually had on scurvy.
Yeah, nice. All right. So, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of attention given to clinical trials, and trials also had a lot of responsibility for being able to control the pandemic ultimately. But a lot of lasting changes came out of it from remote trials and other elements of that. What sort of changes have you seen if we look pre-pandemic to post-pandemic in the clinical trial landscape?
Personally, I think it's probably the first time that my family actually understood what I did for a living. So that was one positive output. But there has been some very lasting changes. I think one is just mentally how clinical researchers, how both small biotechs, as well as large pharma have approached clinical trials and have approached research is with a renewed rigor. How can we go faster? There is a common saying about patients are waiting. And that was true during the pandemic, of course, when the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for, when we could come out of our houses and things like that and return to more of a sense of normalcy. But also that continues every day in lots of different diseases, oncology patients who are looking for new treatments and for new opportunities, new options in their care, cardiovascular patients, immunology, and on and on. And really, as an industry, we've challenged ourselves to think really creatively how we can be faster, how we can be smarter about where we're making investments that are really going to yield the best results for patients.
When I think about moving faster in any process, but especially a really complex one like clinical trials, often there's a focus on bottlenecks because it's the sort of the slowest point that's going to hold back the overall progress. Do you think about clinical trial timelines in that way? And if so, what are some of the key bottlenecks that you see?
Yeah, I think you're right. And with any complex process or complex situation, it's rarely the case that there's one silver bullet or one answer to all of the problems. So we look at ways in partnering with our customers and partners in the industry to knock down all of the barriers that combined help for an overall better patient experience and accelerating trial timelines. Some of those are around patient recruitment. How do we identify the right patients and reach out to more patients that will benefit from clinical trials, but who are also very reflective of the populations ultimately that new therapies will serve? And how can we reach them in new and novel ways to engage people who otherwise might not have been involved in clinical research historically? Sometimes that means developing digital technologies that allow us, to work outside of major academic centers, which have been a lot of the lifeblood of clinical research for so long. But also it means looking into more data and AI-driven approaches that help us identify who are good candidates for clinical research. The other is during the execution of the trial itself, we continue to look at ways to accelerate the overall process, whether that's automated anomaly detection, for example, and getting to cleaner, better data faster, whether that's using insights in AI that help us design better trials that are more likely to deliver a good patient experience, but also a good outcome that are going to demonstrate the safety and efficacy of a new therapy. There's a lot of different at-bats that we're taking essentially to try and shorten the overall time frame, but also increase the positive results that we get from new therapies.
Tom, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but sometimes we have people here on the podcast that go on to do and say crazy things after they finish. So one of our guests was the current FDA commissioner. And what I'm referring to there is they recently announced a rapid rollout of AI, and I mean rapid, so that I think it was just last month, which was May. And it said that, based on the results of one of their first pilot, they're going to roll out AI for scientific review everywhere and have it all completely done by the end of June. What I won't ask you to make a political comment, but what is the impact of what FDA is doing in terms of review using AI? What impact does that have potentially on trial timelines and regulatory interactions?
I mean, I think it's an example of how we're truly in an age of disruption where we are looking at AI as being a transformative technology that should challenge us to think differently about how we've historically done things. Certainly, in order to take advantage of these new technologies, this new opportunity that AI and more advanced analytics brings, it brings a renewed focus on data. How we are collecting and organizing that data, but also how we're being transparent in the usage of that data, engaging patients, for example, more in the discussion around how the data that they provide in the context of a clinical trial can be used for sure for that trial, but also the potential benefits that it can bring long after. Having those conversations upfront and early, I think will only open up new opportunities that will accelerate research. Similarly, we have to think differently about our infrastructure and the investments that we make. I think it shouldn't be a surprise that big sponsors, large pharma, as well as biotechs, are themselves very aggressively looking at the promise of AI, so that it's not only regulators that are then applying it at the end, but we're thinking about what is that practice all the way through. It should open up new opportunities for better collaboration, more interim reads, better working between industry and regulators so that we can continue to get what we jointly all want, which is better outcomes for patients. And we all want those outcomes faster.
So it's hard to say, and I won't even try to say if FDA made an announcement last month in this direction. They're making other sorts of announcements too. So there's a lot going on. So we'll have to follow up in a year or so and see where it's going. But what do you see kind of right now for some of these immediate impacts of AI in trials, not necessarily driven by FDA, but you talked, in any case, we know that there's always a use of analytics and other techniques. It's not that everything was just being done with pen and paper and, rules of thumb up till now, but where are the specific aspects where AI is being used for clinical trials today?
Yeah, we're definitely a long way away from like multi-part forms and shipping around paper all over the planet. Thank goodness. Really, you can think of a lot of the AI innovations in three big buckets. The first, not surprisingly, are all around operations. How do we go faster, be better, higher level of quality, identify potential challenges before they occur? A lot of that, for example, is in data review, using AI to surface anomalies or potential challenges in data that start to allow you to ask the right questions, perhaps then working with your sites to make sure that you've got the right answers. Is that data telling you a story that is somewhat surprising or perhaps there's an anomaly that looks different than maybe the rest of the study that you should understand more deeply. Similarly, on the operations side, around better operations decision-making, where should you run your trial? Clinical trials, like healthcare broadly, it's a very global enterprise. And a lot of decisions need to be made around, what countries, what population should be included, what is that inclusion and exclusion criteria? And AI is certainly informing a lot of that. The second is really around the design itself. And I think this is the really exciting piece of AI, where we start to surface a lot of clinical insights that help us make good decisions that help in the safety of the trial for patients, identifying potential risks, for example, of adverse events so that we can plan for them before they occur. That generates a better overall patient experience, as an example. Identifying better endpoints. These are all optimizations that we can make on the trial design, and we can do simulations before the trial ever starts so that we're setting ourselves up for a better overall trial experience. And the third, which is really emerging now, which I think is really exciting across not only in clinical research and across life sciences, but in all industry, is this more human experience that AI is allowed to provide. For a long time since the invention of technology, it's been a lot about how do we help people conform to how technology works. We trained everyone how to use web browsers and now mobile devices and the like. But what we're seeing really in the continued evolution and very fast-paced evolution of technology, including AI, is that now the machine can start to create, it meets the user more where they are. So more conversational, for example, it's understanding or at least trying to understand more of intent. And this creates entirely new ways that our users will interact with our platform. We're not just making the old thing faster and maybe better and more precise, but now we're creating new ways for patients and for sites, for all of those who participate in clinical trials to interact differently with technology. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things we'll see develop over the coming years.
One of the areas that receives a lot of focus in terms of being a bottleneck is patient recruitment, but also recruitment and retention of the patient in the trial. And I'm not sure how much you're involved in the recruitment side, but certainly what you just described is going to impact retention. Does AI have a role there? What's the role there for AI and retention?
Certainly, it is a challenge. Both recruitment and retention continue to be, one of the major contributors of trial delays. And there can be a lot of factors that go into that. Certainly, some parts of research have become quite crowded spaces where there's a lot of competition for a relatively few number of patients who are aware and who are open to clinical trials. Again, we can increase that pool by building trust and awareness in clinical research and grow the number of people who are willing to participate. But still, in some diseases, that's going to be quite challenging. The fact is also that trials can be quite difficult without a support system, without the flexibility to participate in research. It can be hard for patients to continue that journey through a clinical trial. And their AI is really helping in identifying burden points in a protocol, for example. So things that will create undue pressure on a trial participant that maybe we can think about alternatives for. It can challenge design, such as presenting opportunities for more, say, mobile data capture or use of sensor technology, for example. So you're limiting the number of times a patient has to visit a site. I think we often think that trial participants live next door to hospitals or research centers, and the reality is, in many cases, they don't. They may have to travel long distances, and so the more we can think about trial designs that are amenable to patients, the better it is. Long have we tried to get that insight, certainly working collaboratively with sites. Clinicians have provided that feedback. And this is just another data point to help us get better and better at designing trials that help keep people in the trial.
I think there's a lot of promise there. One of the things that I think about for AI is that it at least gives it a sense of empathy, which can be important. And even though this concept of patient burden has been there and it's kind of assessed and analyzed at a certain level, it may be missing out on what the true experience is. I'll just give an example for me as somebody who wanted to be a participant in a trial, actually for a Lyme disease vaccine, which I thought, I'd gotten Lyme disease at one point. I live in an area with a lot of Lyme and also a lot of hospitals, as it turns out, in Boston and on Cape Cod. And they were recruiting for something great, and it was kind of a rough process. But then when they asked me to be in it and I looked at the protocol, and it's like, even though I have my own business and a lot of flexibility, there's no way I could do it. Forget it. Even though I'm motivated for that. So I think that is a place where AI could at least pinpoint what's going on and probably say, here's the trade-off in terms of you might be able to get this level of enrollment if you made these sort of changes. You might be able to get a lot more patients or do it faster, whatever, without compromising the quality. So that really resonates for me, what you described.
Yeah, and I think that the flip side of that is also true. Is as we're able to automate, or AI can start to do more of the tasks that, for example, the site personnel used to do. Now they have an opportunity to spend more time with patients. Which the more clinicians you talk to, the more they would wish that they could do, but they also have a lot of other tasks. The more we're able to automate, coding and summarization and all of the rote work and rote activities that they have to do, the more time they have to spend with patients, which I think is also going to deliver a better experience, both for everyone involved in a trial, all the stakeholders, but as well as patients.
So I'm bullish on clinical trials and the potential and what's already been achieved for AI. I'm also conscious that some of the concerns that people have about participating in a trial may in fact be exacerbated by the introduction of AI. Are you finding that? What are the elements of AI that cause you to consider other sorts of protections that need to be in place, or at least considerations when discussing this with any kind of stakeholder in the space?
I mean, one of the things that we think a lot about is, we are developing health technology in a very unique part of the care journey. And it's a place where openness and transparency is really beneficial, especially if you're talking about, patients, our oncology patients, patients with very serious and potentially rare and life-altering diseases. It's important to try and build that trust. And technology can be a big trust builder, but it can also be a barrier of trust. And so we think about a lot of that in the design of our software. For example, we use patient insights to design our software to make sure that we are taking the patient's point of view into account, even though they are not customers of our software. They certainly are users. The same is true of AI. It's important that we try to build transparency around what data is used, how an outcome was determined, a suggestion, for example, was made, a course of action was taken. This is not an area where black boxes essentially are going to work very well. They will only slow the adoption, whereas the more we're able to open up the insides and build confidence about how the technology is operating and why it's operating, I think is one. And then you touched on the other is the more we can think about that technology being empathetic and the way that it interacts. This is, I think, an area that people often think about chatbots, for example. The early stages of them, it was very clear you were talking to a machine, and I don't think that builds confidence in healthcare. But the more that they evolve and become more and more sophisticated, the more we're building that rapport, if you will, and that confidence, both in patients but also in the clinicians that are participating in trials, that we're doing the right thing.
So soon before all the attention shifted to large language models and generative AI, there was a lot of discussion about AI and the biases that it could reinforce based on the data that it was trained on. What are you seeing in terms of the impact there with biases in AI, and what do you or sponsors or others do to try to mitigate those biases?
Yeah, bias has existed in analytics since the beginning of analytics. And certainly, as we've developed more sophisticated algorithms, whether they be machine learning models, now large language models, it's important that we've always had an idea towards the limitations that the data that we have and the insights that data can provide. I think the great thing is in research and in clinical research, there has always been such a focus on that, thinking very deeply about inclusion and exclusion criteria, for example. So who participates in a trial and what that will mean for the conclusions that you can make from it and what limitations you have are important. As we take that into our software development practices, it's very important that we continue to keep that focus on what really is the limitation of the technology and the data that we have. I think it's also encouraged a lot of companies to, including our own, to look in collaborations that help, build bigger and bigger sets of data that can start to address bias in a sort of algorithmic way, if you will. But the last is there's still very much a high human touch in clinical research, and that should continue. And that's, the ultimate in balancing out potential biases. We have people at the end of the technology who are interacting with patients, and we still rely a lot on them on making good, informed clinical decisions.
A lot of this discussion certainly involves things that Medidata is involved with, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk about maybe some of the specific initiatives for Medidata related to AI and how AI fits in. Is it just sort of the thing to talk about today? Is it going to be, fairly central? But just talk about what the kind of the vision is and where some of the specific initiatives are falling within Medidata.
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly, it's the question on front of everyone's mind today. Is there isn't a meeting that I take that goes by that someone doesn't ask, "Hey, what is your strategy around AI? What are you doing?" What I'm very proud about is, ours began more than 10 years ago now in beginning to invest in this technology. That began with recognizing the value of the data assets that exist in clinical research and the importance of curating that data and really focusing on the quality of that data so that it can be used to train models and build algorithms that would help accelerate clinical trials or give us insights that were difficult to find. And so that gave us a real head start as we've continued to now incorporate that into our technology. I think a big step that we took last year is recognizing that we really needed to accelerate that focus on AI specifically and embedding it into all of the experiences that users have on our platform, but in technology generally. Not that the AI should sit off to the side, that something that you swivel chair over to, ask some questions, and then come back to your daily work, but rather that it becomes part of your daily work, and more it works collaboratively with you to solve a problem. And that's really what we've been focused on. Some of that is very upfront in trial design and startup, building a more agentic feel that is helping, for example, make decisions around countries and site footprint, moving towards accelerating site startup and getting the right documents and agreements around, and then tracking like where they are. But also then during execution that we continue to kind of focus on the anomaly detection, the quality of data, if you will, and accelerating the readiness of data for clinical interpretation. I think that's another big area. The third is we continue to also be inspired by our industry that has all been about innovation and to some degree moonshots, and so we keep looking for what are some of those really transformative opportunities. We've had the privilege of working with some very forward-thinking companies in rare disease, for example, that have embraced AI techniques to really change fundamentally the way that trials were designed using synthetic control arms, for example, really removing people from the control arm of a trial so we could get more people on experimental therapy without losing the statistical power of that trial because we can augment it with synthetic patients. We see a lot of interest in that space about being able to explore and understand disease and the impact of medicine on patients without always having to poke a patient, so to speak, but rather to be able to simulate more and more. And Medidata is very proud in the partnerships that we've had to be kind of at the forefront of that, and we'll continue to look to be a good partner in that space.
When Medidata was a startup, you really changed the industry with the whole electronic data capture, and a lot of folks were kept, flat-footed, and there's a lot of very rapid growth for quite some time. I'm wondering if you look now at AI, which is arguably even more of a fundamental disruption, although it probably required electronic data capture to actually to do anything with it, but it's potentially at least as big as EDC. How is an established company positioned compared with startups? Are startups in a position to go and kind of reinvent things and leave others flat-footed, or is there an advantage for incumbents or some kind of combination?
It's a great question, and one that we could probably spend hours talking about. I love the saying, on the shoulders of giants, and I benefit from the 26 years of metadata investment and progress before me that has put us in a position to do some of the super exciting things we're doing right now. But it's not a given then that will yield another 25, 26 years of success. It's still to us to be hungry, to continue to push ourselves to think in the way that a startup does out of necessity. And I think that's a thing to really focus on. One reason why startups tend to be really fast innovators is they take a lot of risks. They try a lot of things. We talk more about the successes in startups than we do necessarily about the ones that didn't pan out. And there is sometimes a belief that large established companies, big pharma players maybe can't do that. And I don't think that that's true. I've had the benefit of working for some personally, but also now working collaboratively with many who I would say are very innovative and are carving out parts of their organization to think like startups as well, so they can be like much more aggressive. But we will continue to see this is a space that there's a lot of startups that are going to come out with really exciting tech that we as a health technology company will look to embrace, and how can we be a part of that. But we're also a part of the more established part of the industry that is going to make investments that deliver a lot of that at scale. So I guess the shorter answer is I think it's an all of the above. But it really starts with making sure that everyone continues to be like hungry like they were when they all first started, whether that was a company, a pharma company that went after their first molecule and their first approval, and now they're on to their 100th, or a technology startup that in our case started in electronic data capture and thought there was a better way to run clinical trials, to where we are today. So I'm really excited for that. I think we're up for the challenge. If anything, we're energized by that. And just from the discussions that I have with people around our industry, I think that's generally held, is that we look at this for the transformative opportunity it is, not that there is any one person who has like cornered the market on success in that.
Tom, my last question is one that I ask all my guests, which is whether you have a book that you'd like to recommend to our audience, something you've read recently or less recently, and doesn't have to be about business or AI.
I laugh because I would say the book that I read most right now is Dr. Seuss's 1, 2, 3. I'm having 2 children now under 3 years old. But I am a very avid reader, and now I've shifted more to podcasts, and there is a very active community now of podcasts, so I can listen to that on my way into the office, for example, whether that's on AI, on technology, or on current events.
We can make it very self-reinforcing here. You could recommend the HealthBiz and CareTalk podcasts as the ones to do. My favorite at that era, at that age, I don't know if you have, is Fox and Socks.
I read that this morning.
Yeah, that's a good one. How fast can you read it? We could have a little contest. I don't know if I could do it like I could in the old days.
I'll tell you a little inside story about Medidata Next. We were talking about that just before we started. Yes. So big presentation or big customer event that we do. I actually last year read myself and recited it over and over, Fox and Socks, because it's almost like a tongue twister. So it's a great way to get into the motion of getting on stage and talking about exciting.
That's good. I think it goes, Fox and Socks, our game is done, sir. Thank you for a lot of fun, sir.
That's right.
In any case, my guest today has been Tom Doyle, Chief Technology Officer at Medidata. We've been talking about clinical trials day and AI and a whole lot more. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. Tom, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.